Slavery, one of the most lied about topics in American public schools. It existed throughout the entirety of human history, certainly the entirety of civilization, and many, if not most countries throughout history have engaged in it more than the United States, right? As Thomas Sowell has pointed out in the past, there were about 300,000 people brought into the United States, which was significantly higher than the few million that were enslaved from the 1500s through the 1900s, which was a couple million of North African pirates enslaving Southern Europeans. Not only that, many of these slave traders went as far north as Ireland or Iceland to enslave people, as other communities in the Mediterranean became more aware of piracy and tried to defend themselves. The pirates had to go outside of the Mediterranean in order to find slaves. And that's not the type of thing they're taught in school. We're not taught about the fact that Thomas Jefferson sent the Marines to Tripoli to end this piracy and enslavement of American citizens. It's an incredibly important factor. And then just a couple years after that, another unbelievably important thing happened. The British launched the blockade of Africa in 1809, and that effectively ended the West African slave trade. Were they doing it out of empathy? Not really. I mean, might have been part of it a little, but they were also trying to compete with the Portuguese and the Spanish and all the money they were making from the slave trade. Furthermore, the slave trade was worse throughout that central band of Africa, right? 10 to 12 million people taken out of West Africa, 20 million out of Central Africa, 10 to 12 million out of East Africa. And quite a lot of the males were, how do I say this? They were turned into eunuchs and then sold to the Muslims because they needed them for harems, for government, for domestic labor, for all these sorts of things that they needed, that they felt they needed them for. But that's quite messed up. But anyways, let's see what Thomas Sowell has to say about the issue.
Tom, reparations. We began by talking about disparate impact, the idea that discrimination is so deeply embedded in the American experience that it can take place even in the absence of an intention to discriminate. So this argument, which is that there's some basic flaw or sin that's still with us, comes up in the case for reparations. Longish quotation, but it sets something up. But from Ta-Nehisi Coates in an article in The Atlantic entitled "The Case for Reparations." White supremacy is not merely the work of hot-headed demagogues, but a force so fundamental to America that it is difficult to imagine the country without it. And so we must imagine a new country. Reparations is the price we must pay to see ourselves squarely. The wealth gap merely puts a number on something we feel but cannot say, that American prosperity was ill-gotten and selective in its distribution. What I'm talking about is more than recompense for past injustices. What I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to spiritual renewal.
Yeah, well, I mean, this guy is effectively a Marxist who believes in that's his religion. Ta-Nehisi Coates thinks that if two minorities get in a fight, it's still an example of white supremacy because he believes it's an intrinsic part of institutions and culture. That's a religious view, and Marxism is a religion. They think that these things are intrinsically evil and need to be destroyed, and that once they can destroy institutions and culture, they can usher in some sort of perfect utopia. And that's the essence of every type of socialism, communism, and fascism, is that materialist worldview. And it's a complete failure. They can't remove ideas from people without ending that person. So these sort of leftists, oh man, the end result of their ideas are just degeneracy.
Close quote. And Tom Sowell makes what of that?
Well, it tells me that I've made the right decision not to read the Atlantic for decades. Slavery is a very big subject. I have in my home an entire bookcase of books about slavery in various parts of the world and various times of history. And the sad fact is that slavery has been a universal institution for thousands of years, as far back as you can trace human history. And what we're looking at is if slavery is something that happened to one race of people in one country, when in fact the spread of it was around the world. In 1776, which is when Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, as well as when the United States got started, he said that Western Europe is the only place in the world where there is no slavery. And even in the Western Europe.
That's very true. The last of the chattel slavery that existed in Western Europe was Andalusian Spain. So when the Spanish finally kicked the Muslims out of Spain in 1492, think about that. That's another thing that they don't teach you in school, right? You know about that. You know that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but did you know that they kicked the Muslims who were engaging in every type of slavery out of Andalusian Spain? You know, they had chattel slavery, they had sex slavery, they were creating eunuchs, they were engaging in forcing males into military conscription, which is arguably a type of slavery. If you're, not, because well, it is really. They force you into Islam to become part of that religion, and that was a common thing in Muslim empires. The Ottoman Empire also not Ottoman Empire was not in Spain, but it also engaged in devshirme or devshirme, where they would conscript children at young ages, like 6 or 8, forcibly convert them into Islam, and then make them fight for the Ottoman Empire. Then they become oftentimes something called janissaries, if you want to look that up.
Europeans had vast numbers of slaves in the Western Hemisphere,
yes,
but not in Western Europe itself. And so if you're going to have reparations for slavery, it's going to be the greatest transfer of wealth back and forth, and between and cross hauling, as they say in the railroads, because the number of whites, for example, who were enslaved in North Africa by the Barbary pirates exceeded the number of Africans enslaved in the United States and in the American colonies before that, put together. I know, but nobody is going to North Africa to ask for reparations because nobody is going to be.
And again, that was like from the 1500s onward. That what he's talking about with those huge numbers isn't even counting when the Muslims invaded Spain in 711 and enslaved people until 1492 when they were kicked out. Right? We have no idea how many people were enslaved during that time period, but we know that the Muslims were doing their the things that their prophet did, Muhammad, and constantly invading and stealing other people and forcing them into slavery. And of course, many other cultures did similar things as well. But I really think the Muslims perfected creating those slave militaries. But anyways,
Fool enough to give it to them. Here we have intellectuals who can imagine a different history from the rest of the world, even though it's so similar to the rest of the world.
Tom,
another great video from the great Thomas Sowell. Make sure you check out Thomas Sowell quotes. It's not my account, but they provide or share quite a lot of good content. And please like and share our content as well. That'd be fantastic. We really appreciate any views, likes, shares, subscribes. Thank you. Have a great day.